In 30 years on this bench, I have never seen such calculated deception within a family.
2 years ago, I thought the worst thing that could happen to me was being humiliated at my cousin's wedding. I was wrong. The worst thing was discovering the truth about my family and having to prove it in court. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Andrew, and I've always been the poor cousin in a family of successful people. My father died when I was 12, leaving my mother and me with almost nothing, while his brother, Uncle Thomas, built a real estate empire that made him millions. Growing up, I watched my cousin Bethany get everything she wanted. Private schools, expensive cars, designer clothes, European vacations. Meanwhile, my mother worked 2 jobs just to keep us afloat, and I wore second-hand clothes to school. But family is family, right? At least that's what I thought. The wedding invitation arrived on expensive cardstock with gold-embossed lettering. Bethany Morrison was marrying some investment banker named Clayton Pierce, III. The ceremony was at the most exclusive country club in the city, and the reception was black tie optional. I didn't own a tuxedo, so I borrowed a suit from my neighbor that didn't quite fit. I should have known something was wrong when Bethany seated me at table 12 in the back corner near the kitchen doors. My mother wasn't even invited. Bethany claimed there wasn't enough space, but I counted at least 50 empty chairs throughout the evening. The ceremony was beautiful, I'll give her that. Thousands of white roses, a string quartet, and enough champagne to float a yacht. But it was during the reception that everything went wrong. I was standing by the bar, trying to nurse a single beer and avoid the judgmental stares from Bethany's friends when she approached me with her new husband and his parents. "Clayton, honey, I want you to meet my cousin Andrew," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "He's the artistic one in the family." I wasn't artistic. I was a struggling accountant working temp jobs, but I forced a smile anyway. "Andrew works in numbers," I said, extending my hand to Clayton. Bethany laughed, a sharp sound that made several nearby guests turn to look. "Oh, please, Andrew, let's be honest about what you really do." She turned to Clayton's parents, who were clearly worth more money than I'd see in 10 lifetimes. "Andrew here does data entry at a temp agency when he can get work." The blood rushed to my face. It was true, but the way she said it made it sound pathetic. "There's nothing wrong with honest work," Clayton's mother said politely, but I could see the pity in her eyes. Bethany wasn't finished. "Oh, absolutely not. It's just funny how different people turn out, you know. Some of us work hard and build something meaningful." She gestured around at the opulent reception. "And others just drift." "Bethany," I said quietly, hoping to end this before it got worse. "I mean, look at this suit," she continued, reaching out to adjust my lapel like I was a child. "Poor thing probably had to borrow it. I offered to lend him money for something proper, but he's too proud to accept help." She had never offered me money. Never. In fact, the only time she'd ever contacted me in the past 5 years was to send that wedding invitation. "The important thing is that Andrew is here to celebrate with us," Clayton said, clearly uncomfortable with his new wife's behavior. "Of course," Bethany smiled brightly. "Family is so important, don't you think? Even when some family members can't quite keep up with the rest of us." I excused myself and spent the rest of the reception hiding in the bathroom, leaving as soon as I could without causing a scene. I drove home in my 15-year-old Honda, replaying every humiliating moment. But here's the thing about humiliation. Sometimes it's just the universe preparing you for something bigger. 6 months after the wedding, Uncle Thomas died suddenly of a heart attack. He was only 62. And none of us saw it coming. The funeral was smaller than Bethany's wedding, but just as expensive. Black cars, imported flowers, and a reception afterward at the same country club where she'd humiliated me. This time, I didn't even get invited to the reception. A week after the funeral, I got a call from a lawyer named Patricia Wells. She specialized in estate law and had some questions about Uncle Thomas's will. "Mr. Morrison," she said during our phone call, "I'm representing several parties who have concerns about the probate process for your uncle's estate." "I don't understand," I said. "What does this have to do with me?" "Well, that's what we're trying to figure out. According to the original will filed with the court, you're not mentioned at all, but we've discovered some irregularities. My uncle's estate was worth approximately $8 million. His house alone was valued at $2.3 million, and he owned rental properties throughout the city. According to the will that Bethany had filed, she inherited everything except for small donations to 3 charities. But Patricia Wells had found something interesting. We located your uncle's safe deposit box," she explained during our meeting at her office. "Inside was a different will, dated 6 months before his death. In this version, you inherit 40% of the estate." I nearly choked on my coffee. "That's impossible. The signatures match, and it's properly witnessed and notarized, but here's where it gets complicated. Bethany filed the earlier will with the court, claiming it was the most recent version. Either she didn't know about this newer will, or she did know and filed the old one anyway. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Morrison. Estate fraud is a felony. I stared at the copy of the will in my hands. My uncle's handwriting was clear in the margins. Andrew has always been the most honest member of this family. He deserves better than what life has. Given him, there were tears in my eyes as I read those words. Uncle Thomas had noticed. All those years of struggling, all those family gatherings where I felt invisible and he had been watching. What happens now? I asked. We can test the probate. It won't be pleasant. Bethany will fight this and she has resources. But if this newer will is legitimate, she's committed fraud and there will be criminal charges. The legal battle took 18 months. 18 months of depositions, document reviews, and mounting legal bills that Patricia agreed to handle on contingency. 18 months of Bethany's lawyers trying to prove that the newer will was forged, even though 3 handwriting experts confirmed it was authentic. During discovery, we learned some disturbing things. Bethany had been managing Uncle Thomas's affairs for the past 2 years, including his banking and legal documents. She had access to his safe deposit box and had cleaned it out within hours of his death, before anyone else even knew he was gone. But the smoking gun came from an unexpected source. Clayton Pierce III turned out to have a conscience. 3 months into the legal proceedings, he contacted Patricia Wells privately. He wanted to meet, and he had something to show us. We met at a coffee shop downtown, away from the lawyers and court buildings. Clayton looked terrible. He'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "I need to show you something," he said, pulling out his phone. "But first, you need to understand that I love my wife, or at least I thought I did." He showed me a video on his phone. Bethany in their kitchen talking to someone off camera. "The old fool updated his will 6 months ago," she was saying. "Can you believe he wanted to give Andrew 40%? Andrew, who's never worked a real day in his life." The voice off camera belonged to a man I didn't recognize. "So what did you do?" "What do you think I did? I took the new will out of the safe deposit box and burned it. Then I filed the old one. Andrew will never know what hit him." I felt sick. This was my cousin, my family, talking about stealing millions of dollars from me while laughing about it. "There's more," Clayton said, fast-forwarding through the video. "She talks about forging documents and bribing the bank manager to let her into the safe deposit box early." "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Clayton was quiet for a long moment. "Because the woman in that video isn't the person I married. Or maybe she is and I just didn't want to see it. Either way, I can't be part of this. She'll destroy you in the divorce." "Probably," he said. "But I can't live with myself knowing what she did to you. Your uncle was a good man. He helped my father with a business deal years ago, never asking for anything in return. He didn't deserve this." 2 weeks later, Clayton filed for divorce and turned over all the evidence he had gathered. Not just the video, but bank records, email communications, and recordings of phone calls where Bethany discussed the fraud with her co-conspirators. It turned out she wasn't working alone. The bank manager, a man named Leonard Foster, had accepted $20,000 to give Bethany access to the safe deposit box before the court could freeze the estate assets. Uncle Thomas's lawyer, Gregory Nash, had been paid $50,000 to lose copies of the newer will and claim he had never seen it. The case went to trial on a rainy Tuesday in October. I wore the same borrowed suit from Bethany's wedding, but this time it felt like armor instead of shame. Bethany's defense team was expensive and aggressive. They claimed the newer will was a forgery, that Clayton had fabricated the evidence out of spite, and that I was a desperate man trying to steal money I hadn't earned. But Patricia Wells was better. She presented the handwriting analysis, the witness testimony, and the forensic evidence that proved the newer will was authentic. She showed the jury Clayton's videos and played recordings of Bethany laughing about committing fraud. Most damaging of all, she called Leonard Foster as a witness. Foster had been arrested 3 weeks earlier for embezzling bank funds, and he was facing 20 years in prison unless he cooperated. He testified that Bethany had approached him 6 months before Uncle Thomas died, asking about the contents of the safe deposit box. She wanted to know if there were any recent changes to his will, Foster testified. "When I told her about the new document, she offered me money to let her access the box after his death before the court could seal it." "And you agreed?" Patricia asked. "Yes. She paid me $20,000 to let her into the box the morning after Thomas Morrison died. She took out the newer will and some other documents, then told me to report that the box only contained the older will and some personal effects." The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of rain against the windows. But the most dramatic moment came when Patricia called Bethany to the witness stand. Bethany had maintained her composure throughout the trial, sitting straight in her chair with her expensive lawyer whispering in her ear. But when she took the oath and sat down in the witness box, something in her face changed. "Mrs. Pierce," Patricia began, "you were responsible for managing your father's affairs in the months before his death, correct? I helped him with some paperwork, yes, including trips to the bank and meetings with his lawyer, occasionally." Patricia walked to the evidence table and picked up a folder. "I'd like to show you Exhibit 47. This is a bank record showing that you accessed your father's safe deposit box on March 15th of last year, 6 months before his death." Bethany's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled him. "According to the bank's records, you spent 45 minutes in the viewing room with the contents of that box. What were you doing for 45 minutes? I don't remember exactly. Let me help refresh your memory." Patricia played a section of Clayton's video on the courtroom's display system. Bethany's voice filled the courtroom. "The old fool updated his will 6 months ago. Can you believe he wanted to give Andrew 40%? The jury shifted in their seats. Several people in the gallery gasped audibly. "Mrs. Pierce, is that your voice on the recording?" Bethany's composure cracked. Her face went pale and her hands started shaking. That's taken out of context. What context would make it appropriate to steal someone's inheritance?" "Objection. Sustained. Rephrase, counselor." Patricia smiled. "Mrs. Pierce, did you remove documents from your father's safe deposit box without authorization from the court?" "I took what was mine, including a will that left 40% of the estate to your cousin." The courtroom erupted. Bethany's lawyer was on his feet, the judge was calling for order, and Bethany was crying openly in the witness chair. "He didn't deserve it," she shouted over the noise. "Andrew never worked for anything in his life. He's weak and pathetic and poor, and Dad felt sorry for him." The judge slammed his gavel repeatedly. "Mrs. Pierce, you will control yourself or be held in contempt." But Bethany was beyond control now. "I worked my whole life to make Dad proud. I got good grades, I went to the right schools, I married the right man. And he wanted to give half of everything to Andrew. Andrew, who couldn't even afford a decent suit for my wedding." The judge's face was stone cold. In 30 years on the bench, I learned later he had never seen such calculated deception within a family. "Mrs. Pierce," he said slowly, "did you knowingly file an outdated will with this court while concealing the existence of a more recent will?" Bethany's lawyer was pulling on her arm, trying to get her to stop talking, but she shook him off. "Yes, I filed the real will, the one that made sense. Dad wrote that other will when he was sick and feeling sentimental. It wasn't what he really wanted." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Patricia Wells didn't need to ask any more questions. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood up and read the verdict. "We find that the will dated 6 months before Thomas Morrison's death is authentic and represents his true final wishes. We further find that the defendant, Bethany Morrison Pierce, knowingly committed fraud by concealing this will and filing an earlier version with the court. I inherited $3.2 million, but the money wasn't the end of the story. 3 days after the verdict, the district attorney filed criminal charges against Bethany, Leonard Foster, and Gregory Nash. Bethany was charged with estate fraud, conspiracy, and bribery. Foster and Nash faced similar charges plus additional counts related to their professional misconduct. Bethany's trial made headlines in the local newspapers. "Socialite SDEALS inheritance from cousin." The same reporters who had covered her lavish wedding were now documenting her perp walk. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution of $4.8 million, including interest and penalties. Leonard Foster got 6 years, and Gregory Nash was sentenced to 3 years and disbarred. Clayton Pierce III divorced her while she was awaiting sentencing. He kept their house and most of their assets, since they were acquired with money from her criminal activities. Last I heard, he moved to Portland and started teaching high school math. As for me, I used the inheritance money to start my own accounting firm. It's small, just me and 2 employees, but we specialize in helping families navigate estate planning and probate issues. I've seen too many situations where family members try to take advantage of each other, and I want to help prevent that from happening to other people. I also use some of the money to take care of my mother. She's living in a nice assisted living facility now, and she doesn't have to work 2 jobs anymore. Uncle Thomas would have approved of that. 6 months ago, I got a letter from Bethany in prison. She wanted to apologize and asked if I would visit her. I thought about it for a long time, but ultimately decided against it. Some betrayals are too deep for forgiveness, and some family bonds are broken beyond repair. But I did do one thing with that letter. I framed it and hung it in my office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that success isn't about how much money you have or what kind of suit you wear. It's about integrity, honesty, and treating people with respect. Uncle Thomas saw that in me when nobody else did. He saw past the borrowed clothes and the temp jobs and the second-hand car. He saw someone trying to do the right thing in difficult circumstances, and he rewarded that with his trust. Bethany saw weakness where Uncle Thomas saw strength. She saw failure where he saw potential. And in the end, her inability to see past the surface cost her everything. I still drive that 15-year-old Honda, by the way. It runs fine, and it reminds me where I came from. But now when I walk into a courtroom or a business meeting, I don't feel ashamed of who I am or where I've been. I learned something important during those 18 months of legal battles. Justice isn't always swift, and it isn't always fair, but sometimes, if you're patient and you tell the truth, it finds its way to the right place. Bethany thought she was smarter than everyone else. She thought her money and her connections and her expensive lawyers would protect her from the consequences of her actions. She was wrong. The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you try to bury it. And when it does, when that moment comes in a crowded courtroom with a judge and jury watching, all the money in the world can't save you from what you've done. 2 years ago, I was the poor cousin who couldn't afford a proper suit for a wedding. Today, I'm a successful business owner who learned that sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money. It's knowing that someone believed in you when you couldn't believe in yourself. Uncle Thomas gave me more than 40% of his estate. He gave me the confidence to fight for what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible. And in the end, that turned out to be worth more than all the money Bethany tried to steal. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if she had just been kind to me at her wedding. If she had treated me with basic human decency instead of using me as entertainment for her rich friends. Would Uncle Thomas still have updated his will? Would the whole legal battle have been avoided? I'll never know. But I do know this. The woman who mocked me for being poor ended up losing everything, while the man she mocked built something meaningful from the ashes of her cruelty. That's not just justice. That's poetry.